So we will continue with our discussion, and the rest of the part will be recorded. So welcome back to evolution of trade unions and evolution of the trade unions across the globe. And we have started with discussing evolution of the trade unions in Great Britain, because unionism started in Great Britain and which is spread across the world. And our trade union movement has been greatly affected by the developments in Great Britain. So we have been discussing it. We have already discussed 18th century and 19th century, and now we are into the 20th century. So I just mentioned to you the general strike of 1926, and in response to the general strike, the government made general strikes and other solidarity action illegal and placed restrictions on picketing through the Trade Disputes and Trade Union Act 1927, and the act remained in force until 1946. The restrictions were on trade unions during the World War II as well. So we continue our discussions hereafter. So on a we have taken two periods, 1946 up to 1969 and 1917 till today. So this was in the last quarter of 20th century, and then the era was ushered in 21st century, which saw some changes also, and we will see that. And after the Second World War, the Labour government's program of nationalization of the coal, gas, electricity industries, and the establishment of a comprehensive welfare state made the state a major employer. So now you can see whatever that public sector undertakings that you see now, that the roots laid in these decisions of labor government. And you know how the Labor Party was formed, and this party which frequently rules Great Britain. Alternatively, they rule. Sometimes it is conservative and sometimes it is labor, and they have their own agendas. So, but still, the politically they support the Great Britain. So after the Second World War, when the Labour Party came to the power, then they nationalized coal, gas, and electricity industries, and this is how the state became the major employer. You can very well see again a rare picture here, and here what you see is pickets at the London docks during the general strike 1926. Been a student of IR, remember this strike. It has got an historic significance, and you can see workers picketing. Picketing is in progress, and this is a rare picture again. Was made available by London Metropolitan University. We are thankful to those sources on the internet. So Britain experienced a period of growth and high levels of employment in 1950. Women's employment level increased steadily. This was also a period when workers from former colonies in the Caribbean and South Asia migrated to fill labor shortages in UK. So this is how the labor migration started. And today you see a lot of Indian diaspora that you see in the Caribbean islands and America and world over. This is because there were vacancies created. So even to fill up those gaps, even women started taking employment, and number of women taking employment grew. And today almost we get an equal number of females. This was also a period when workers from colonies in a Caribbean and South Asia migrated to fill labor shortages in the UK. So after you have noted how this migration started from Southeast Asia, India to those pockets, this was also a period when workers from formal colonies, as I would like to highlight it, uh, Caribbean and South Asia South Asia migrated to fill the labor shortages. The union membership continued to grow steadily during 1950s and 1960s. This was also a period when trade unions gained important victories such as first equal pay legislation. So male and female should be paid on a equal rates. In some parts of on a agriculture, even I understand there was a system where females were paid less than males. Today, if you see, you go to bank, you go to private sector, or any male and female are paid equally. So this was also a period when trade union gained an important victory, such as first equal pay legislation. So certain major things which we have discussed in today's lecture, if you remember, is that how minimum wages act came into being, how they got minimum wages, how they got their working hours issue solved, and also equal pay. In 1970s, was the period of unprecedented industrial action, and that's why it was bifurcated. During 1970s, 20.9 million working days each year were lost to strike action, and that is what I have been stressing, focusing on. Like strikes actually results into loss of mandates, which ultimately uh, culminates into loss of production and revenue, and that again have an impact on economy. So rising to 29.47 billion in a winter of discontent. So this is also known as winter of discontent. There was a winter, unprecedented winter in Great Britain, and there was a lot of strikes that took place in that particular era. By comparison, according to Office for National Statistics, the number of working days lost to strike fell to 4.1 million in 1989 and was down to 1.39 million in 2011. So slowly, gradually, the days which we lost means which were lost in Great Britain due to the strike were reducing, were getting lesser and lesser. Now again, one more picture which you see on your screen. Woman machinist at the Ford Motor Company plant in Dagenham took strike action on 7th June 1968 for equal pay. The woman won the pay increase to 92% of the men's wages. So again, women fighting for this, and they had a partial victory, not 100%, 92%. And Ford has been an icon to those, you know, some milestones as far as productivity, labor, unionism is concerned. Because here, where Fayol, Taylor, and all are recited, they Ford has always been accepting their thought processes on productivity and on welfare of the employees and all. And now you see here, even when it comes to the evolution of the unions, the Ford company's example is in picture. So equal pay. Then was a considerable amount of industrial and political conflict at that time. The miners came out on strike in 1972, the first time since 1926, and their action in stopping supplies of coal to the power station led to the imposition of a 3-day working week on British industry to save electricity. So you can very well see the impact. And the miners were successful in achieving higher wages, but discontent soared against in 1974, leading to further strike. The conservative government refused to compromise, and the situation led to Edward Heath, the Prime Minister, declaring the state of emergency and reintroduced a 3-day week. Heath called a general election for 20th February, believing that the country would be in a sympathy with him, but the conservatives were defeated. The Labour government and the minor reached a deal shortly afterwards, and the strike ended. So again, the Labour Party came to power. The new Labour government under Prime Minister James Callaghan also attempted to control public sector pay rise in order to curb inflation. So take a note of it. Even Labour government was compelled to do that. So this led to so-called Winter of Discontent in 1978-79, during which there were widespread strikes by public sector trade unions. But these strikes during the coldest winter of 16 years ultimately led to defeat of Callaghan's government in 1979 and the election of the Conservative Party government under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. So Margaret Thatcher era started. This is because of the Labour Party, which opposed the rise in order to curb inflation. So this was a new era. First time Britain got a woman prime minister, and she had given very effective contributions under her regime. In 1970s, the leaders of trade unions were almost exclusively white men. Now, this is something which is to be noted, and this is the era where uh, the migrant labor and their issues came to the limelight. Many migrant workers found that the unions were racist and supported the management in keeping the wages of women and non-white workers down. So this has to be noted. So many migrants workers found that the unions were racist and supported the management in keeping the wages of the women and non-white workers down. Trade unions frequently failed to support strike actions by their women and non-white members for better pay and condition. So you had some incidences mentioned in the bracket here. You can take a note of it. And from 1970s onwards, in the context of the second wave of feminism, women workers successfully mobilized their unions to take up issues like equal pay, maternity rights, and you see even those issues of white and non-whites workmen and migrant workmen and coming from Southeast Asia, that also surfaced. Non-white workers also organized through and outside their unions on racism in the workplace, and trade unions began to respond to these political pressures by making greater efforts to recognize these issues and the needs of diverse groups of workers. So this is how the 20th century after 1970s marked with those prominent things, the cold winter there and the winter discontent and lot of the mandates been lost, lot of agitations and mine workers, change of government in Great Britain, and all those things. It was against this background of industrial strike in 1970s that one of the most significant the strike in the history of the labor movement took place at the Grenwick film processing plant in 1976-78, when black and white workers came in their thousands in a show of support for South Asian women in a small factory in North London. So first time you see even those workers coming and standing behind those South Asian women's in North London in 1976-78. So during the 1980s and 1990s, the British trade union movement faced several interrelated challenges. High unemployment led to decline in union membership. So that was a major setback, especially in those industries which traditionally had a strong union base. The Conservative government privatized many of the former nationalized industries, including the railways. Now, you were also discussing about privatization of the railways in India and to what extent it will be privatized and all. To some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. Let us wait and watch. So, at that point of time, Conservative government did that. So railways were privatized in Great Britain, gas and electricity was privatized, and the public services increasingly used private contractors for key activities, which you see even today, all of which reduced union influence and strength. So the government as an employer was now uh, you know uh, denationalizing those things. Hence it was now what is said here is reduced in union influence and strength. But by far the biggest challenge to trade unions ability to defend workers right was from conservative government that was committed to curbing the power of trade unions. So why did this say like that? Because some of the legislations which were passed by conservative government that affected labor union movement. In 1984, ministers in their tens and thousands against took the miners took to the strike in 1984. uh, Again, this time against planned closures of coal mines. Margaret Thatcher was determined to win the battle against the strikes, whom she termed the enemy within. This was one of the most divisive conflict in a post-war Britain, with high levels of police violence and mass arrest of the strikers and their supporters. So 1984, to be noted, even 1984 is a very memorable period for India. Our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated at that point of time. Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government passed five major pieces of legislations between 1979 and 1990. So you can see Margaret Thatcher's popularity, and she got a successive wins, and she passed those legislations which together weakened the powers of union by making more difficult to strike legally. So that is why it is called this conservative party was against the uh, trade union movement. Tony Blair's Labour government did not reverse the Thatcher's changes, and that was a unique part of it. So you know this Tony Blair, you must have heard this name frequently. So trade union membership in UK reached a peak of 13 millions in 1979 and then declined steadily until the end of 20th century. So you can very well see, according to Fluton in 2011, over a quarter, 27% of all UK employees were member of the trade union, though union density was much higher in a public sector, 57%, than in a private sector. So as a matter of fact, there should have been more unions in private sector, because private sector victimization is supposed to be more than a public sector. But you can see the picture here. More 57% of the membership in public sector, whereas 15% in private sector in Great Britain. So now we have come up to the era of 2013. So the law gives workers the right to join a trade union wherever they work. So now there are things, change of things. And when I'm going to discuss with you the IR code bill 2019 and the wage code bill 2019, we will try to analyze it from the different perspectives and angles. And also whether this is again a matter of debate, whether privatization is good or bad, or those public sector companies, are they generating enormous profits or not, or are they capable of continuing with their operations, or should they rely on private players, private contractors? Are private contractors good? Are they more efficient than the public servants? And all that issues are there. It's not like they are not there. Uh, Actually, there were banks were nationalized. Then there was a denationalization of the banks. Today, you will see SBI has become the largest bank, and this is because some other banks were amalgamated into SBI, and all the issues that are happening around us, and you and me will keep a watch on them, and we will definitely not only we will keep a watch on them, we will try to analyze them, and uh, you know, this will also give an insight as to how the trade unionism movement is doing at this point of time. So up to 2013, in Great Britain, we are discussing the evolution of the trade unions across globe, and at this point of time, our case in point is Great Britain, and we are not going into the details of the history, but on a on the outset of it, we will see the major events here. The law gives workers the right to join trade union wherever they work. The right applies whether union has been recognized or not. Now make a note of it. And workers are protected from being disadvantaged from being union members. So even if the union is not recognized, if the person is a member of a union, the union can protect such a member, and that is also recognized. It is illegal for an employer to refuse worker employment. Now, this is something very important because we heard about the unilateral decision taken by uh, employers, and victimization of the employees, and employees lose their job even without being given uh, chance to defend themselves, and the employer, you know, uh, he runs the organization with his own sweet will. So even that is happening around. So workers employ you, but according to this bill, the trade union laws which were legislated in 2013, the employer cannot refuse the worker employment or dismiss him or her for for selecting workers for redundancy because their trade union members or activities. So no such argument. No worker should lose a job because they are unionized or they work for union. The law also gives worker right not to join a trade union. So those workers who don't want to join trade union, they cannot be forced to join trade union. So when a union is recognized by an employer, member also have the right to time off at an appropriate time to take a part in trade union activities. So this is again a major feature of those legislations. If the workers would like to take some time off from their work schedule and go and participate in a union activities, they were allowed to do so. So it was allowed. Now, to what extent and all, that union and management has to discuss and come to some conclusions. So these may include voting in ballots in industrial action, voting in union elections, and meeting to discuss urgent matter. So a lot of democracy at work. was been introduced, and so that workers can have their consensus and the majority will can prevail. From July 2013, the coalition government announced new upfront fees up to pound 1,200, which workers will have to pay for taking employment tribunal cases against their employer. So now you can note it down. So if at all you have to take up a case against your employer, then you will have to pay that an amount, and which is a huge amount for any worker. So this fee applies to workers pursuing sexual harassments at work. So that was something that was hampering the growth of unions, and a race discrimination complaints after they have been unfairly dismissed. So some of them were actually dismissed because of their race and because of their color of the skin, or a lot of reports about sexual harassment at work were reported. So women cannot file case because the fees were so hefty. So trade unions have criticized this move, which the minister claims will save money for business and taxpayers as the latest attack on workers' fundamental right. So if you are not taking helping the workers out, and if you are levying such a hefty fees for taking up the dispute, that means you are just saving taxpayers money for not good cause. So it is an attack on workers fundamental right. That is how the trade union criticized the decision of coalition government. A report found women and laid-off staff worst hit by these charges, with 80% fall in sex determination claims and 85% drop in unpaid wage cases. So this is something uh, which need to be noted, and which is something which has affected the evolution of the trade unions. And you can see people cannot fight for those discrimination at work based on sex and their race, and unpaid wages cannot be recovered because many a time your wages may be smaller than the fees you may pay, or you would like to avoid all that legal hassles and messes. Then now we have reached up to 2015 and 16. So trade union bill, which began its journey into law by being presented into Commons on 15 July 2015. You know that in a Great Britain, they have a House of Lords and House of Commons. House of Commons is nothing but Lok Sabha. House of Lords is nothing but Rajya Sabha. So represents the biggest shakeup in the rules on industrial actions in 30 years. Under current rules, the strike requires a simple majority of those union members that take part in the ballot. But the trade union bill would impose a minimum 50% turnout, and public sector strike would need the backing of at least 40% of those eligible to vote. Everyone with a vote, not just those who cast vote. If there are 100 teachers, just an example is taken here of a teachers. So if there are 100 teachers in a union, 50 of them will have to vote, and 40 out of the 50 who voted, so 40% of the union members, that is 80% of those who voted in this case, would have to vote for strike for it to go ahead. So things were more complicated. But if the majority of the members thinks that they should resort for striking, they should go for and strike, then strike should take place. So with this, we have now come to the conclusion of this particular discussion, the trade union evolution of the trade union in a Great Britain. Now, we will discuss the evolution of the trade union in India, and so we have got 16 minutes at our disposal. So, welcome back. And now, our now we will discuss the trade union movement in India. So I have been bringing it to your notice, like 1857, and Mumbai University started. There was a mutiny, Mangal Pandey incidents, and then thereafter, a lot of mills were been set up by the Britishers, and not only in Mumbai, but they were in Vidarbha and other areas as well. And many, even whatever we just discussed for Great Britain, happened in India as well. Many persons from rural area migrated to urban area. So you can say these are our the intra migrations and interstate migrations were there, and these people who migrated from rural to urban just to take up a job because there were prospects, brighter prospects. So you start. It was an era where you witnessed urbanization in India. So you can very well be noting this particular time. The trade union of today are the product of industrial revolution, which began in Great Britain between 1750 and 1850. So we have just completed this discussion on what happened in Great Britain, and that's why I first took Great Britain, because and also this discussion doesn't end here, because we continue to discuss even more, even what is happening, what is going to happen in today's time, and what is going to happen even after today, even in future, as far as trade unionism is concerned. And that discussion will also lead us to several other aspects of trade union, the benefits to the society, the benefits to the members, and the functioning of the trade union, and what should be an ideal trade union functioning, and all those kind of thought processes. So as you have taken a note of it, and we have studied, we have just discussed it, what happened in Great Britain during 1750 to 1850. So now you can divide this period, the growth and development of trade union movement in India, so social welfare period, and you can very well note it down. Social welfare period 1875 to 1918, early trade union period 1918 to 1924. Then you see left wing trade unionism 1924 to 1934. Then trade union unity period 1939 to 1945, and post independence period 1947 to till today's date. So post independence, and in a post independence we have also bifurcated it, like earlier it was an IT revolution, and today we have a social revolution. And so uh, now we will discuss this development of trade union movement uh, periodically. Now take a note of it, and it's for your general knowledge, as well as if you are attempting any quiz or MCQs. The first textile mills in Mumbai was established in 1851, 1851, and you all know when the first railway was introduced. It was in 1853. So these two have connections. So first textile mill, and why textile mills were established in Mumbai. That time there may be less of artificial humidification. The climate of the Mumbai was conducive for textile mills, manufacturing of textiles. The hot and humid climate. The first jute mill was the first set up in Kolkata in 1854. So that also you may take a note of it. Now, what happened in 1875? Sorabji Shapurji of Mumbai led a movement for legislative measures against the miserable conditions in the factories. So, please note of this person, tributes to these people who have taken up those issues which were very much required at that point of time, 1875. And so great tribute to this Sorabji Shapurji of Mumbai. And you know, Mumbai has contributed a lot to the trade union movement. And so 3 years later, in 1878, the Brahmo Samaj organized the working men's mission in Kolkata. So you all are aware about this Brahma Samaj, and their initiative in 1878. Now, please take a note of it. Yesterday, as I said, now these discussions will lead us to understand when the first strike recorded. So do note this. The first strike recorded in India was in Impress Mill 1877. So 1877. And striking workers were at the same time liable to prosecution according to the terms of Workers' Breach of Contract Act 1860. So this act also you have studied in your first year, the Contract Act, 1872, and later on there were some changes made in this. So workers' breach of contract was there in 1860, and also you have a civil code existing and introduced at that point of time. So the workers were prosecuted. So those who participated in strike were prosecuted on the basis of the recommendations of Bombay Factory Commission 1875. The first Factory Act was passed in 1881. So please note it. And even when we are going to discuss those acts in this fourth chapter, we had a lot of act to discuss, and we will discuss Factories Act as well. And here you will have to take a note of it. Like the first Factory Act was passed in 1881, and this act proved highly inadequate. There were large-scale protests in Mumbai workers. And there comes Mr. L.M. Lokhande, the factory worker, conveyed mass meetings of about 10,000 workers in Mumbai in 1890. So you can just imagine a mob of 10,000 workers on Girgaon Chowpatty in 1890, and how many British officers may be there. One of the senior professor told me, sir, there will be hardly 200 British officers who may be managing Mumbai, and the uh, population of Mumbai may be around 30 lakhs or so. Today we have a 1.5 crores and more. And what he suggested is like an every day, if you not in lockdown, today don't try to go to Girgaon Chowpatty. It's not allowed during the pandemic. But when things are normal, around 3,000 people are found strolling uh, and enjoying this Girgaon Chowpatty area. But at that point of time, in 1890, gathering a mob of 10,000 was unique, and Britishers took a note of that. So L.M. Lokhande, the rise of L.M. Lokhande as a union leader, a new, this was an great era. Now, what did Mr. Lokhande do? He had immensely contributed, and Mr. Lokhande drew up a memorandum containing demands for limitation of hours of work, weekly rest days, midday recess, and compensation for injuries. See his contribution. And today those things are available. So we have to thank to him, because at that point of time he actually contributed it. He fought for it, and that's why we got it. So today it's Sunday holiday. We every Sunday we must remember Mr. Lokhande, and for those Workman Compensation Act, or you have ESIC, they have their roots into this compensation for injuries. If a worker dies or gets injured out of his in and out of his employment responsibilities, then he is compensated. So compensation for injuries. The Bombay Mills Owners Association considered the demand of Mr. Lokhande for weekly holidays. So that is the great achievement by this uh, person. Encouraged by this, Mr. Lokhande established in 1890 the Bombay Mill Hands Association, regarded as the first labor organization in India. We have just studied the first labor labor union in Great Britain or in the world. And now you see the first labor union in India. So that was formed by Lokhande in 1890, and the name was Bombay Mills Hands Association. So please make a note of this and remember this. In the year 1920 was a crucial importance in the history of the trade union movement. The necessity of electing delegates for annual international labor conference led to formation of All India Trade Union Congress, that is called INTUP. This is the era of Lokmanya Tilak. In 1920, he died. In 1918, INTUP was formed. So the first session of AITUC was held in October 1920 at Mumbai under the presidency of Sri Lala Lajpat Rai. So now you remember Lal Bal Pal history. We are going nostalgic. We are going historic. All India Railway Men's Federation was formed, and most railway unions got affiliated to it. So this was a major period. So what I will do is I will make a separate video and I will discuss the various trade unions and their rise and the contribution in a separate discussion. So at this point of time, now the time has come to close this session. We are come to the end of this session. So thank you all of you. God bless you.